In the year 2194, Earth had become a model of peace. The planet was a shining example of what could happen when humanity set aside its differences. Wars had been long forgotten, and the people of Earth were known for their compassion, their understanding of other races, and their dedication to diplomacy. The Federation of Planets, a group of diverse species from across the galaxy, had accepted humanity into their ranks with open arms, and Earth had flourished under the banner of cooperation and unity. Humanity was no longer a warlike species. They had built a reputation of negotiation and compromise. No one in the Federation believed that humans could be a threat to anyone. That belief was about to be shattered. The Zorath, an alien race of conquerors, had been watching Earth from afar. They were known throughout the galaxy for their brutality, their hunger for power, and their disdain for anything resembling peace. The Zorath considered themselves superior to every other race, believing that they had the right to take what they wanted. They had been content to watch Earth's peaceful rise, mocking humanity's weakness from the shadows, but when they saw an opportunity to strike, they seized it. It started on the outer rim of the Federation. In a remote mining colony on the edge of known space, the Zorath struck without warning, their ships appearing out of nowhere and landing on the colony without hesitation. Their weapons tore through the buildings. Their soldiers stormed through the streets, and in a matter of hours, millions of human lives were lost. The colony, once a thriving community, was reduced to rubble. The survivors were taken as prisoners, and the few who managed to escape sent out frantic messages for help. At first, the Federation's response was slow. After all, the attack was on a far-off colony, and the Zorath were well known for their desire to expand their territory. The Federation sent diplomats to open negotiations, hoping to avoid further conflict. But the Zorath had no interest in negotiations. They were interested only in domination, and they showed no sign of stopping. When the news reached Earth, the government was faced with a decision. The Federation Council, composed of representatives from many different species, debated what to do. Should they send a military force to stop the Zorath, or should they continue with diplomacy? Earth's leaders were known for their pacifism, their commitment to finding peaceful solutions to conflicts. But this time, there was something different about the way the news hit them. The human people, from the cities of Earth to the colonies spread across space, watched in horror as the Zorath's actions were revealed. The stories of the attack on the mining colony flooded the news networks. The images of the destruction, the ruined homes, the dead bodies, the screams of survivors were burned into the minds of every human. This was not an attack on a far-off place. It was an attack on humanity itself, and Earth's people were beginning to change. In the United Nations Assembly, leaders from every corner of the planet gathered. Tension filled the air as they argued over how to respond. The voices of diplomats, military commanders, and civilian leaders clashed in the chamber. Some suggested that Earth should follow the Federation's example and try to resolve the situation through peaceful means. Others believed that the Zorath should be punished for their actions, that Earth could not simply stand by while its people were slaughtered. At the heart of the debate was General Sarah Hayes, a decorated war hero and the head of Earth's military forces. She had spent her life pushing for peace, but even she could feel the anger growing inside her. She had seen the same images the rest of the world had seen. She had heard the stories of the survivors who had been lucky enough to escape, and she knew what this meant. Peace, she said firmly, standing at the front of the assembly. Peace is not possible when one side is intent on destroying the other. The Zorath don't want peace. They want to wipe us out. They've already done it once, and they will do it again. It's time we stop pretending that we can reason with them. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. General Hayes knew that her speech would not be well received by everyone, but she couldn't stand by any longer. She had seen enough. It was time for Earth to take action. We have tried diplomacy for hundreds of years, she continued. We've built alliances, forged treaties, and worked tirelessly to avoid conflict. But this is different. The Zorath have crossed a line, and now, they will learn what happens when they challenge humanity. The tension in the room grew as Hayes's words resonated with more and more people. Finally, the president of Earth stood up. General Hayes is right, he said, his voice filled with resolve. We cannot allow this to continue. We have been too soft for too long. Now it's time for humanity to show the galaxy what we are capable of. And so Earth's response was clear. No more waiting. No more negotiations. Humanity was done being passive. The gloves were off. The decision was made. General Hayes was given full command of Earth's military forces, and a new strategy was devised, one that would take the Zorath by surprise. The people of Earth would no longer rely on diplomacy and peace talks. They would fight, and they would fight to win. Earth's military began to mobilize. For the first time in over a century, weapons were brought out of storage and the human fleet was put on high alert. The elite forces that had long been in reserve were called into action. The ships that once sailed peacefully across the stars now prepared for battle. Humanity was preparing to send a message that no one would forget. General Hayes and her team began to work in secret, making plans to strike at the heart of the Zorath Empire. But they knew they couldn't do it alone. Earth's allies in the Federation were hesitant to join the fight, unsure if they should risk war with such a powerful foe. So humanity would have to do it on their own, with their own strength, their own willpower. As the days passed, the anger of Earth's people grew. The message spread like wildfire. Now we stop being civilized. The media outlets broadcasted the call for action, and soon, millions of civilians volunteered to join the military. They built weapons, prepared supplies, and pledged their lives to the cause. The Zorath had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would learn the true cost of that mistake. General Sarah Hayes sat in her command center, surrounded by the hum of advanced technology. The walls were lined with maps and tactical data displays, all flashing with information about the Zorath forces. The room was tense, quiet except for the occasional murmur of officers working behind her. Everyone knew what was at stake. The Zorath had attacked without mercy, wiping out entire colonies. And now Earth was preparing to strike back. The decision to go to war was not made lightly. Humanity had prided itself on diplomacy, but those days were over. Now Earth was focused on one thing: revenge. General Hayes looked at the screen in front of her, where the image of the Zorath homeworld loomed large. The planet was a dark, intimidating sphere, surrounded by a web of defense systems and ships. It was a fortress. But General Hayes wasn't intimidated. She knew the stakes and she knew how to fight. The Zorath had underestimated humanity, and now they would pay the price. "We're ready," she said, her voice steady, but with a hint of resolve. "It's time to show them what happens when you push humanity too far." Back on Earth, the people had already begun to mobilize. Earth's military had been restructured and reorganized, pulling together the most skilled soldiers, engineers, and scientists the planet had to offer. Civilians were now working around the clock to build new weapons and technology. Factories, once used to produce peaceful goods, now hummed with the construction of spacecraft and artillery. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers, eager to do whatever it took to avenge the colony's loss to the Zorath. The people were united in a way they had never been before. It was not just the soldiers who felt the call to action. It was every human on Earth. Children created posters, urging their families to support the cause. Local leaders organized fundraisers to send resources to the front lines. And across every continent, the message was clear. Earth was no longer the peaceful, diplomatic species the galaxy had once known. Humanity was fighting back. General Hayes and her task force, known as Vengeance, were the spearhead of this new war. The group was made up of the best and brightest of humanity: military leaders, strategists, scientists, and even former diplomats who had come to understand that peace was no longer an option. They had been tasked with taking the fight directly to the Zorath homeworld. With Earth's fleet assembled, the plan was set into motion. The first step was a series of covert strikes to cripple the Zorath's military infrastructure. The Zorath, while technologically advanced, had grown complacent, believing they could strike and conquer without facing real resistance. General Hayes knew they had to hit the Zorath where it hurt the most, at their core. They couldn't afford to fight a long, drawn-out battle. The attack had to be swift and decisive. "Focus on their power plants, their communication hubs, and their fleet yards," Hayes instructed her officers. "If we take down their infrastructure, they'll be blind, vulnerable." The humans had developed new technology for the mission, including stealth ships capable of bypassing the Zorath's defenses. These ships were equipped with cloaking devices that made them nearly invisible to the enemy's sensors. The first strike would be silent, deadly, and swift. As the ships launched from Earth's orbit, General Hayes felt a strange sense of calm. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment when Earth would stop being civilized and start fighting with everything it had. She wasn't sure if they would win, but she knew they had no other choice. The mission began with a series of covert raids on Zorath military bases scattered across the outer regions of their empire. Each attack was carefully planned, each strike executed with precision. The humans didn't wait for the Zorath to strike again. They were already hitting back, making their presence known. The Zorath were caught off guard. Their defenses, once seen as impenetrable, were suddenly falling apart. Communications were down, power plants were destroyed, and their fleet was in disarray. For the first time in centuries, the Zorath were not the hunters. They were the hunted. The Vengeance Task Force, using their superior tactics and newfound resolve, struck at the heart of the Zorath's war machine. Human ships, small and nimble, slipped through enemy lines undetected, launching surprise attacks on the Zorath's most valuable targets. Every mission was a success. Every strike was a blow to the Zorath's control over their own empire. But the Zorath were not weak. As the humans attacked their supply lines and military bases, the Zorath began to regroup. They launched a counteroffensive, sending their most advanced warships to engage Earth's forces. The first major battle took place near the Zorath capital, where the humans faced off against a fleet of Zorath warships in a brutal space battle. The Zorath ships were massive, heavily armored and armed with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets in a single blast. The humans, however, had one advantage. They had adapted. Earth's ships, though smaller, were faster and more maneuverable. The humans knew how to fight smart, and that gave them an edge. Engage at maximum speed, General Hayes ordered. We hit them hard and fast. Don't give them time to react. Her fleet moved with precision, darting in and out of the line of fire, avoiding the Zorath's deadly blasts. Human pilots, trained for speed and agility, danced between the larger Zorath ships, delivering pinpoint strikes at weak points in the enemy's armor. Missiles and energy blasts from the human ships connected with devastating accuracy, causing explosions to rip through the Zorath fleet. The battle raged for hours, but the humans were relentless. They refused to let the Zorath regain control. In the end, the human fleet emerged victorious, though it came at a cost. Several ships were lost and many soldiers had fallen. But the message had been sent. The Zorath were no longer invincible. They were not the dominant force they thought they were. The Zorath had underestimated Earth, and now they were paying the price. Back on Earth, celebrations erupted. News of the victory spread across the planet, and people flooded the streets to celebrate. But for General Hayes, the victory felt bittersweet. She knew that this was only the beginning. The Zorath would retaliate. They wouldn't stop until they had been crushed and the war was far from over. We've made a statement, she told her officers, but the real fight is still ahead of us. They'll come for us with everything they've got. We have to be ready for that. The next phase of the war was already in motion. The humans would continue to strike at the Zorath's heart, hitting their homeworld directly. The Zorath would learn that no matter how powerful they were, they could not stand against humanity's will. The war had only just begun, and Earth's people had already shown that they were no longer the passive, peaceful species the galaxy had once known. They had become something more, a force to be reckoned with. The victory over the Zorath fleet had shaken the enemy, but it had not stopped the war. If anything, it had made the Zorath even more determined to wipe out the human threat. Earth's military leaders knew that this fight was far from over, and that the Zorath would soon bring all their forces to bear against humanity. General Sarah Hayes stood at the command center, reviewing the latest intelligence reports. Her face was set in a hard, determined expression. The success of their previous raids had been a huge boost to Earth's morale, but Hayes knew better than to get too comfortable. The Zorath would learn from their mistakes and adapt. They had done it before, and they would do it again. The Zorath are regrouping, Hayes said, turning to her officers. They've already begun to send reinforcements from their other colonies. This won't be an easy fight, not anymore. We need to be ready for everything they throw at us. The room filled with nods of agreement. Everyone knew the stakes. The Zorath were a ruthless species, and they would stop at nothing to destroy Earth's resolve. But humanity was no longer the weak, naive species they had been before. The people of Earth had come together in ways they never had before, and their unity had given them the strength to stand against a foe that was far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. Across Earth, the war effort had gained momentum. People from all walks of life had joined the fight, contributing in any way they could. Engineers worked to develop new technologies to counter the Zorath's advanced weaponry. Scientists developed new biological enhancements for human soldiers, and civilians worked tirelessly to supply the front lines with food, medicine, and equipment. The factories that had once been used to produce consumer goods now churned out weapons, spaceships, and armor. The streets of Earth were alive with the energy of a people united by a common goal. The entire planet had become a war machine, and every citizen played a role in ensuring humanity's survival. In the trenches of space, the human fleets continued to clash with the Zorath. Each battle was more intense than the last. The Zorath had learned from their previous defeats and were now adapting to the humans' tactics. Their warships had been reinforced, and they had deployed new types of soldiers. Brutal, genetically modified warriors that could survive the harshest environments and fight with terrifying strength. The Zorath were pulling out all the stops, but humanity had learned too. Their military leaders quickly adjusted their strategies, using the Zorath's own tactics against them. General Hayes, along with her elite task force Vengeance, began to strike deep into Zorath-controlled territory, targeting their key military installations and research centers. The human fleet, while smaller than the Zorath's, was far more agile. The Zorath had relied on overwhelming firepower, but the humans used speed and precision to their advantage. Time and time again, they hit the Zorath hard, before disappearing into the darkness of space, leaving the enemy to lick their wounds. Despite these victories, the war was taking its toll. The human fleet had suffered losses, and the civilian population was feeling the strain. Food supplies were beginning to dwindle, and entire cities were forced into lockdown to prevent sabotage. Every resource was being channeled into the war effort, but the Zorath's retaliation was growing more brutal with each passing day. The enemy had learned the value of surprise attacks, and now they were using their larger numbers to overwhelm the humans. The Zorath had begun deploying massive fleets, attacking from multiple angles at once, hoping to divide and conquer. Each time the humans struck one of their strongholds, the Zorath would launch a counterattack that seemed to come out of nowhere. General Hayes knew they had to change their tactics once again. This time they could not afford to fight on the defensive anymore. The Zorath were pushing deeper into human territory, and Earth's colonies were at risk of being destroyed. One of the most crucial battles took place at the planet of Vorn, a resource-rich world that had been part of the Earth Federation for decades. The Zorath had set their sights on Vorn because of its strategic location and valuable resources. If they could take the planet, it would give them a strong foothold in the sector, allowing them to launch even more devastating attacks against Earth and its allies. The battle for Vorn was fierce. The human fleet led by General Hayes met the Zorath head-on in orbit above the planet. It was one of the largest space battles Earth had ever fought, and both sides were determined to win. The Zorath sent wave after wave of their warships toward the human lines, while the humans fought back with everything they had. Hayes was on the bridge of the flagship Liberator, watching the battle unfold. Her hands gripped the railing as she barked orders to her officers. "Move the fleet into position. We need to surround them. Don't let them break through our lines." The battle raged on for hours, with explosions lighting up the dark void of space. The human fleet was outnumbered, but they fought with relentless determination. The Zorath had superior firepower, but the humans had their cunning and agility. Hayes knew they couldn't win this battle by brute force alone. It was time for a bold move. She gave the order for a risky maneuver that would take the Liberator and its fleet directly into the heart of the Zorath's command fleet. "We're going in," she said, a steely resolve in her voice. "All ships, prepare to engage at maximum speed." The Liberator and its fleet plunged into the heart of the Zorath armada, using the chaos of the battle to their advantage. With quick, precise movements, the human ships began to pick off the Zorath command ships one by one. It was a high-risk strategy, but it worked. The Zorath were thrown into disarray, their command structure collapsing as their flagship was destroyed in a direct hit. In the wake of the battle, the Zorath forces retreated, abandoning their attempt to capture Vorn. The humans had won, at least for now. But General Hayes knew this was only a temporary victory. The Zorath would return, and they would come back stronger than before. Back on Earth, the people celebrated the victory at Vorn. The war was far from over, but it was a clear message to the Zorath that humanity was no longer a passive species. The humans were not just defending their planet. They were fighting for their very survival. The victory gave the people of Earth a renewed sense of hope. They had held their ground against an enemy far more powerful than they were, but General Hayes remained focused on the future. The war had only escalated and there was still much more to be done. "We've won one battle," Hayes said, looking out at the stars from the bridge of the Liberator. "But the war is far from over. We need to prepare for the next step. The Zorath won't stop until they're sure they've destroyed us, and we won't stop until we've wiped them out." The battle for Vorn had been a hard-fought victory, but it was just the beginning. Humanity had proven that it would not be crushed by the Zorath. They were ready for the next phase of the war, whatever it took. And as Earth's people rallied around their leaders, a single truth became clear to every species in the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the peaceful species they had once been. They had become something much more dangerous. They had become a force of vengeance. The Zorath had underestimated Earth, and now they were facing the consequences. After the victory at Vorn, Earth's military gained a much-needed boost in morale. People across the planet celebrated the success, and the war effort seemed to gain momentum. However, General Sarah Hayes knew better than to let the victory cloud her judgment. The Zorath were not the type to give up easily. Their desire for conquest was driven by an ancient and ruthless mentality. They would not rest until Earth was destroyed. General Hayes stood before a large holographic map of the galaxy, watching the Zorath fleets slowly regrouping in their outer territories. The human forces had struck hard, but the Zorath were not finished. They were gathering all their remaining power for one final push against Earth. The decision had been made. Earth's forces would move directly to the Zorath homeworld. "The time has come," General Hayes said, her voice steady. "We've hit them hard, but they've learned from their losses. If we want to end this war, we need to take the fight to their doorstep." Her officers nodded in agreement. The mood in the room was heavy, the gravity of their mission clear. They had fought countless battles, but now they were about to launch the most dangerous and crucial mission of the entire war. The mission would require Earth's fleet to travel deep into Zorath territory. The human forces were prepared for this moment, but the risks were enormous. If they failed, Earth could lose everything. The stakes were higher than ever before. The fleet, led by General Hayes aboard the Liberator, would be accompanied by a variety of specialized ships, including stealth fighters, medical vessels, and support ships. Each ship had a role to play in what would surely be a dangerous and bloody assault. As the fleet prepared for departure, the atmosphere on Earth was tense but resolute. For the first time in centuries, the world was united in a singular goal. No longer did the people of Earth dream of peace at any cost. The Zorath had forced them to take up arms, and now they would fight to win, no matter the cost. After days of travel, the human fleet arrived in the Zorath system. The enemy homeworld lay ahead, surrounded by a massive armada of Zorath warships. The planet itself was a dark, cold world, its surface scarred by centuries of war and destruction. It was a place that seemed to echo the cruelty of the Zorath people. "Let's get this over with," General Hayes said, standing at the helm of the Liberator. "We take the capital. We end this war." The first waves of attack were swift and devastating. The humans launched a series of long-range missiles at the Zorath defense stations, hoping to disable their shields and weapons. The initial assault was successful, but it did not go unnoticed. The Zorath responded quickly, sending out their own waves of fighters and capital ships to counter the human advance. The battle above the Zorath homeworld was unlike anything Earth had faced before. The Zorath fought with fury, determined to prevent the humans from reaching their planet. Massive explosions rocked space as the two fleets collided. The humans, despite their superior tactics and technology, were outnumbered. Every ship in the fleet was pushed to its limits, each commander desperate to keep their forces alive. General Hayes knew that to win, they needed to break through the Zorath's defenses and strike at their heart. The Liberator led the charge, cutting through the enemy lines, dodging incoming fire, and using their smaller, more agile ships to hit key targets. The Zorath fleet fought back with everything they had, but the humans were relentless. "We've got them on the run," shouted one of the officers from the tactical station. "Their defenses are weakening." But just as the humans began to sense victory, the Zorath unleashed their final weapon, a fleet of massive warships unlike anything they had seen before. These ships were equipped with powerful energy weapons capable of decimating entire fleets in a single blast. The human fleet was caught off guard by the sheer power of the new Zorath ships. "Brace for impact," General Hayes ordered, her voice sharp and clear. "We're not giving up now." The Zorath warships unleashed a devastating barrage of energy blasts. The Liberator shook violently as its shields flickered under the barrage. The fleet struggled to maintain its formation, with some ships breaking off to engage the new Zorath fleet head-on. For hours, the battle continued. The human fleet was losing ships, and the odds were growing worse by the minute. General Hayes stood firm, her mind racing for a solution. If they didn't act quickly, the Zorath would push them back and Earth would be lost. Then a daring plan came to mind. The plan was risky, almost suicidal, but it was their only hope. General Hayes ordered a bold maneuver, an attack on the Zorath homeworld's central command station. If they could take out the central command, it might disable the Zorath's coordination and disrupt their remaining forces. The fleet would split into two groups. One group would engage the Zorath fleet head-on, drawing their attention, while the other would make a desperate dash for the heart of the Zorath's operations. The time for subtlety had passed. The human forces would charge in with everything they had, willing to sacrifice whatever it took to win. General Hayes knew this was their last chance. "We can't afford to fail," she said, her voice filled with determination. "It's now or never." With a full-throttle assault, the human forces split. One half of the fleet charged straight toward the Zorath warships, distracting them with intense firepower. Meanwhile, the other half, led by the Liberator, made their way toward the Zorath homeworld central command station. The Zorath, caught off guard by this unexpected move, scrambled to adjust their strategy. Their warships turned to face the human attack, but it was too late. The humans were already on the offensive, hitting the Zorath's command center with everything they had. The Zorath responded with desperation, sending reinforcements to protect their headquarters, but it was clear their defenses were stretched thin. General Hayes and her team pushed forward with everything they had. They were close to their target now, so close they could almost taste victory, but they were also close to defeat. The Zorath forces fought tooth and nail to defend their command center, and the human fleet was taking heavy losses. Just a little further, General Hayes shouted to her crew. "We're almost there." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Liberator broke through the Zorath's final line of defense. The central command station loomed ahead, a towering structure of metal and energy. The Liberator's weapons fired in quick succession, blasting through the station's shields, and then with a final deafening explosion, the heart of the Zorath's military apparatus was destroyed. The human fleet watched in stunned silence as the central command station of the Zorath exploded in a massive fireball. It was a victory, but it came at a cost. The human fleet had lost many ships in the battle, and many brave men and women had given their lives for this moment. But the war had taken a decisive turn. General Hayes, though exhausted, allowed herself a moment of relief. They had broken the Zorath's hold on their own military. Without their command center, the Zorath forces were disorganized and scattered. Earth's forces had won the battle, perhaps the most important battle of the war. But Hayes knew this was only the beginning of the final push. There was still work to be done, and the Zorath would not give up easily. As the Liberator and the remaining ships of the human fleet retreated from the battlefield, the people of Earth received the news of the victory. It was a moment of celebration and sorrow. The war was far from over, but humanity had just taken one step closer to ending it for good. The destruction of the Zorath Central Command Station was a game-changer. For the first time since the war had begun, humanity had dealt a blow so powerful that the enemy was thrown into disarray. The Zorath, once a well-coordinated force of terrifying might, were now scattered and struggling to regain control. The tides of the war had shifted, but General Sarah Hayes knew that this was not yet the end. The Liberator, battered but standing strong, drifted in the aftermath of the explosion. General Hayes stood on the bridge, staring out into the black void of space. Her thoughts were heavy, weighed down by the enormity of what had just happened. The Zorath were vulnerable now, but the war was far from over. The destruction of their command center was a victory, but it had cost them dearly. Many of their best ships had been destroyed, and they had lost many soldiers, but they were not beaten yet. She knew the Zorath would regroup. They would retaliate. "We've struck a mighty blow," Hayes said to her officers. But don't be fooled into thinking this is over. The Zorath will fight back. We have to be ready. Back on Earth, the news of the victory spread quickly. People across the planet erupted in celebration. The destruction of the Zorath Command Center was a sign that the humans were finally turning the tide. The war, which had once seemed endless, was now within their grasp. It was a hard-fought battle, and humanity had paid a steep price in lives lost and resources spent. But the people of Earth were determined. They had tasted victory, and now they wanted to see the war through to its final conclusion. In the wake of the battle, General Hayes gathered her military leaders to discuss the next steps. The Zorath might be disorganized, but they were far from finished. The destruction of their command center had been a critical blow, but now they would have to push forward and finish what they had started. "We can't afford to wait," Hayes said, her voice steady. "The Zorath will rally. We need to strike now while they're weak. We have the upper hand, but we need to move fast." The task was clear. The human forces would advance on the Zorath homeworld, the heart of their empire. It would be a dangerous mission, but it was the only way to ensure that the Zorath could never strike Earth again. The fate of the galaxy rested on the outcome of this final push. The human fleet, now bolstered by the victories at Vorn and the destruction of the Zorath command station, began its march toward the Zorath homeworld. General Hayes led the charge aboard the Liberator, with thousands of ships following in formation behind her. The fleet was a sight to behold, united and focused on a singular goal. As they entered the outer reaches of the Zorath system, the fleet encountered little resistance. The Zorath were still reorganizing their forces, and their once imposing armada was now scattered and in chaos. The humans pressed on, knowing that the final battle was nearing. The Zorath had no choice but to defend their homeworld, and this time humanity was ready. "We've come this far," General Hayes said, her voice filled with resolve. "We fight for Earth, for the colonies, for every life that the Zorath have taken. No mercy." The battle for the Zorath homeworld was unlike any the humans had faced before. It was brutal, chaotic, and unforgiving. The Zorath launched everything they had left at the advancing human fleet. Massive warships, deadly energy weapons, and squads of elite Zorath soldiers filled the battlefield. It was a fight to the death. There could be no retreat, no second chances. General Hayes and her fleet pushed through the Zorath defenses, engaging in fierce battles across the black expanse of space. The humans were taking heavy losses, but they refused to back down. Their tactics were sharp, their weapons powerful, and their determination unmatched. The Zorath fought with everything they had left, but the humans fought with the anger of a species pushed to the edge. The final confrontation took place in orbit around the Zorath homeworld. The human fleet was met with an overwhelming barrage of enemy fire, but the Liberator and its sister ships pressed forward, cutting through the Zorath lines. The battle lasted for hours, with each side losing countless ships. The Zorath were desperate, but they were not prepared for the human spirit. In the heart of the battle, General Hayes gave the order to move toward the Zorath capital, the planet itself. The Zorath had built a massive fortress on the surface, a symbol of their might and dominance. But it was also their greatest weakness. The fortress was the center of their power, and destroying it would bring their empire to its knees. The Liberator made its final push, leading the human fleet toward the heart of Zorath's stronghold. The enemy's weapons fired with all their might, but the humans were relentless. With each blast, they grew more determined, fighting for the future of Earth and its colonies. The Zorath tried to retaliate, but their forces were crumbling under the pressure. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Liberator broke through the last line of defense. The fortress loomed ahead, a towering structure of steel and energy. With a series of calculated strikes, the humans sent a final volley of missiles at the heart of the Zorath stronghold. The explosion that followed was immense, lighting up the dark sky above the planet. The Zorath Empire had been shattered. The once mighty race was now broken, their war machine completely destroyed. The fortress on the Zorath homeworld had been obliterated, and their leadership had been wiped out in one final, decisive blow. General Hayes stood on the bridge of the Liberator, watching the fiery aftermath of the battle. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. Thousands of human lives had been lost in the war, and the scars would take generations to heal. Still, there was no denying the finality of the moment. The Zorath had been defeated, and Earth had emerged victorious. "Send word back to Earth," Hayes said, her voice soft but resolute. "Let them know the war is over. The message was sent, and soon the people of Earth received the news. There were no grand celebrations this time. There was no victory parade. The war had taken a heavy toll on humanity, and while the Zorath had been destroyed, the cost was clear. The entire planet had been forever changed. Back on Earth, the leaders of the world gathered to discuss the future. The war had been won, but at what cost? The people had shown incredible resilience and unity, but now they faced the difficult task of rebuilding. The world was scarred both physically and emotionally. The losses had been immense, but Earth had survived. "We've won," said President Avery, addressing the assembly. "But the real work begins now. We rebuild, we heal, we never forget." As Earth began its recovery, there was one thing the human race would never forget: the cost of peace and the price of survival. The Zorath had taught humanity a harsh lesson, that peace could never be taken for granted. But in the end, humanity had proven that they were capable of defending themselves, and they had emerged stronger than ever before. General Hayes, standing on the bridge of the Liberator, looked out into the stars, her heart heavy with the weight of all they had lost. But in the distance she saw something else, a future where humanity stood not as a victim, but as a force in the galaxy, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The war was over. Humanity had endured, and from this moment forward the galaxy would remember. Earth would no longer be a species that waited for peace. It would fight for it no matter the cost.